In today's Nonsense Wars train thing, we look at another rebuild of another older model, my Pennsylvania Railroad A6b. The PRR built 3 A6 class switchers at their Altoona shops in the late 20s and eventually reclassified them A6b after midlife engine upgrades. These were the first internal combustion locomotives on the Pennsy, and they operated as switchers in urban yards into the early 60s. My A6 model actually derives from my B1 model. I had been looking for prototypes from which to build the smallest 1:48 scale PF locomotive, and I went from the B1 to the A6 and eventually to the Model 40. Unlike the B1, I actually completed the A6 back in 2015, powering it with the old 9-volt geared motor. I wanted to make the new version using only currently available parts in order to make the model more accessible. First and foremost, I updated the drivetrain to use powered up. The medium motor fits perfectly within the vertical space of the body, since powered up does not need a discrete receiver. I then replaced some less obvious out of production parts, such as the hinges for the radiator greeble and the roof flap. I also decided to brick weather the model, as I like the result on my U30 and on my Trinity gondolas. The otherwise mostly identical body retains the ergonomic features of the original design. You can open the roof flap to access the power button, or remove the entire shell to access the internals. Switching to PU actually makes the latter operation less annoying, as I don't need to accommodate wiring to the top of the battery box. The new drivetrain has a net gear ratio of 9:25. Most of the gears now connect to the same beams rather than to beams plated together. This should make the chassis stronger than before, though I never actually had any issue with the construction of the old A6 or the B1. Nonetheless, the PU motor should give more power and the gearing should give more speed. At full throttle, the A6 V2 laps this basic oval in 15 seconds, whereas the B1 takes 21 seconds. I want to mention tires again. I talked about thin versus thick in the QJV3 video, but that's not quite the whole story. When benchmarking the B1 for comparison, I noted that it only had one tired axle and that both tires had rotted considerably. I had suspected the rotting ever since train pull, but both factors do affect performance, and I finally decided to test them explicitly. I used the same jig with a slightly different set of weights. With no tires, the A6 can pull 100 grams. With 2 rotted tires, it can do 120 grams. With 2 new tires, it can take nearly 160 grams. With 4 new tires, both the A6 with the new drivetrain and the B1 with the old drivetrain can pull up to 180 grams and fairly comfortably break couplers, though the B1 can still high center on bumpy tracks. Nonetheless, 4 new tires will add some friction in tight curves, and I think 2 new tires is a reasonable compromise for general operation. Finally, I also want to touch on powered up control schemes again. The easiest control program, a single proportional slider, must trade off between returning to center or not returning to center. The former forces you to hold the control when moving, but makes it easy to stop. The latter frees your fingers when moving, but makes it hard to stop. If you can't put the throttle back in the exact zero position, the motor will continue to bleed power even after the engine stops moving. Thus, I usually have to stop the engine by stopping the program, and the whole situation feels super lame. The original control scheme I used with the X10 somewhat resolves the trade-off at the expense of less speed granularity and, of course, more code. Perhaps the real problem is still the lack of documentation, which makes it difficult to even look for a better, simple solution. On that note, this is the end of the video, so have a nice day.
I thought it was like a standard thing, but I guess it depends on the body too. So
it's probably just based on the supply that they have.
Yeah.
They can choose between half-inch to 1.5-inch needles, and then your gauge is like 21 to 25. So that's there's a big difference between those.
Yeah.
Oh, you bike all the way here?